Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah,
Today we're going to be looking at the history of phone phreaking and computer hacking,
right.
and culminating in a nationwide crackdown that happened back in 1990.
There you go.
We're going to be looking at this through the lens of Bruce Sterling's 1994 book, Hacker Crackdown.
Right.
It's really interesting. It's this kind of blend of investigative journalism and tech history and social commentary.
Mm.
Gives us a lot of different perspectives on
Yeah.
this moment
Yeah, it does.
in the history of digital technology.
It's a pivotal moment, too. I
Yeah.
mean, you really see the evolution of telecommunication technology and then this clash between like the hackers and these big corporations and then, of course, law enforcement.
Right. And how those worlds that seem so separate
Yeah.
actually collide.
Right. And they're not separate anymore.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about how it all started with something, as basic as the telephone.
Well, that's what's so interesting about Sterling's book.
Yeah.
He takes us back to the very beginning, to Alexander Graham Bell
Uh-huh.
and like that goofy prototype that you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, that clunky experiment that turns into what Sterling calls like the world's largest and most complex machine.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
The telephone.
It really is. And, it makes you wonder what Bell would think if he could see how much his invention has changed the world.
I think he would be surprised by a lot of things.
Yeah.
Especially the role of Theodore Vail.
Oh, yeah. Theodore Vail.
Right, he was this former post office manager.
Okay, so from the mail to phone calls, that's quite a leap.
That's right, and he ended up leading AT&T and basically shaping the entire landscape of American telephony.
What was his big contributor? I mean, what was his, main focus?
Universal access.
Okay.
Everyone should have a phone, he believed.
Interesting.
And that was a very different approach from Europe at the time.
Okay.
In Europe, telephones were seen as more of a luxury for the wealthy.
So thanks to Vail, America becomes this nation of phone users, and that's where things start to get interesting.
That's where things start to get really interesting.
Right, because Sterling talks about those early telephone operators.
Oh, yeah.
The teenage boys who had a little too much fun with the switchboards.
Well, you got to remember that back then, calls were manually connected by these operators.
Okay.
So you had these teenage boys, and they couldn't resist a good prank.
Oh, so they're just like disconnecting calls and connecting strangers.
Yeah, just messing around with the system.
Yeah.
Their own personal playground.
It's like a precursor to what later becomes hacker culture.
Right. Sterling calls it this early glimpse of the hacker mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That blend of technical curiosity and, well, let's just say a flexible approach to the rules.
Bending the rules. Yeah, and speaking of bending the rules,
Yeah.
that brings us to phone phreaking.
Okay.
So for anyone who's not familiar with the term,
Yeah.
phone phreaking was essentially using your technical knowledge to kind of exploit weaknesses in the phone system
Right.
to mainly make free long-distance calls.
Exactly. And one of the most famous tools of the trade was the blue box.
The blue box.
The blue box, which generated a specific tone that tricked the system into giving you free access to those long-distance lines.
Oh, wow. And this is where it gets even crazier.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak,
Oh, yeah.
the founders of Apple, were actually selling blue boxes in their early days.
It just shows you how blurry that line between innovation and rule-breaking can be.
Yeah.
Especially in the world of technology.
Yeah.
And Sterling doesn't shy away from, like, the ethical questions surrounding phreaking.
Yeah.
Like, was it harmless fun?
Right.
Or was it stealing?
Yeah.
It's a debate that continues to this day
Hmm.
as technology advances and creates new opportunities for, well, let's call it creative exploration.
Right. And phone phreaking might have started with these, mischievous
Yeah,
teenagers, but it didn't disappear as technology evolved, it adapted.
you're right. When cell phones came onto the scene, phreakers found new ways to exploit them.
Huh.
They were reprogramming chips to avoid charges getting around police wiretaps.
That sounds more like espionage than a prank.
It does make you wonder about the motivations behind some of these activities.
Yeah.
And while phone phreaking continued, another form of digital mischief was emerging computer hacking.
Okay, so we've got the phone phreakers pushing the boundaries of the telephone system,
Right.
and then the computer hackers come into the picture.
Yeah, and that's when things really start to heat up.
So what made them such a target for law enforcement? I mean, what was it about these computer hackers that made them, public enemy number one?
Well, according to Sterling, a lot of it had to do with their self-perception.
Okay.
Hackers saw themselves as this elite group
Mm-hmm.
operating outside the rules of society.
So not just tech savvy, but they had a different mindset as well.
Right. They believed in the free flow of information,
Oh, okay.
and they felt like traditional rules just didn't apply to them.
Interesting.
It wasn't necessarily about causing harm,
Mm-hmm.
although, of course, there were exceptions.
Yeah.
They even had their own code of conduct.
Really?
Yeah, a set of unwritten rules.
Wow.
A strong sense of community.
So they police their own ranks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They would call those who broke their code rodent-like, and sometimes even turn them in to the authorities.
So they were policed from the inside and the outside.
Exactly.
But then things really escalate in 1990.
Yeah.
That's when you have this massive crackdown on the hacker community.
Right.
So who are some of the key players involved in this digital showdown?
Well, on the hacker side, you had people like Emmanuel Goldstein,
Okay.
who was the editor of 2600 magazine.
2600 magazine.
That publication was like the Bible for phone freakers and hackers.
Wow. And then there's Night Lightning,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
edited PHRACK.
Another underground magazine,
Uh-huh.
focused more on like the technical side of hacking.
Interesting.
And these guys, along with others like Fry Guy and Leftist,
Okay.
really helped shape the hacker scene.
And let's not forget about the computer bulletin boards,
Oh, yeah.
which were kind of like the social media of their day.
Yeah.
They were used by hackers to connect,
Share information.
sometimes plan their next move.
And those bulletin boards played a crucial role in the circulation of something called the E911 document.
The E911 document.
This document detailed how the 911 emergency system worked.
Okay.
And its release caused a major panic.
I can imagine having that kind of information out in the open could be incredibly dangerous.
It's seen as a serious threat,
Yeah.
potentially allowing anyone with the right knowledge to disrupt the 911 system.
Wow. And then as if things weren't tense enough, the phone system crashed on Martin Luther King Day in 1990.
The infamous phone crash
Yeah.
sent shockwaves through the country.
And no one knew what caused it at first.
Suspicion immediately fell on the hacker community,
Okay.
particularly a group called the Legion of Doom,
The Legion of Doom.
which was considered the elite of the elite hackers.
Oh, wow.
They became the prime suspects even though their involvement was never proven.
So you have these hackers driven by their own code and this belief in open information, and suddenly they're public enemy number one.
Right. And on the other side, you have law enforcement agencies determined to protect critical infrastructure
Yeah.
and crack down on what they saw as criminal activity.
Right.
The U.S. Secret Service, the Chicago Computer Fraud Task Force, they were all ready to make a statement in this new digital landscape.
And make a statement they did 1990.
Yeah.
A series of raids target key figures in the hacker community.
Often using a surprising amount of force.
Okay, so they were really sending a message.
Yeah, they wanted to shut down this perceived threat.
Right. The Wild West days of the internet were over.
These raids marked a turning point in the relationship between hackers, law enforcement, and society as a whole.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
That's right. We'll delve deeper into the consequences of this crackdown and how it shaped the future of the internet.
Join us next time for part 2.
See them.
So these raids were meant to kind of like dismantle this hacker infrastructure. But were they effective? I mean, did they actually achieve what law enforcement set out to do?
That's a great question, and it's one that Sterling really digs into.
Okay.
I mean, the truth is these raids were a turning point,
Okay.
but their effectiveness is debatable.
Okay.
Law enforcement was stepping into a whole new world with the digital realm, and they faced a lot of challenges.
I can imagine the challenges. I mean, we're talking about like the very early days of computers.
Yeah.
Did they even have like the tools and the knowledge to handle these kinds of crimes?
That's a really crucial point.
Yeah.
Like, traditional investigative methods often just fell short. When it came to computer crime, you have these agents raiding homes, seizing computers, stacks of floppy disks.
Yeah.
But did they really understand what they were looking at?
It seems almost absurd now, but back then, computers were this mysterious new frontier,
Right.
even for the people who were supposed to be like upholding the law.
Exactly. And Sterling really highlights the struggles of groups like the Secret Service and the Chicago Computer Fraud Task Force. They were dealing with a lack of specialized training, not enough personnel who really understood the technology,
Right.
and a legal system that was still trying to catch up with the realities of cyberspace.
So you have this situation where the technology is evolving so rapidly
Yeah.
and the law is just like struggling to keep pace.
Totally. And that led to some, well, interesting situations.
I bet, like, what kind of situations are we talking about?
Well, one of the most striking examples Sterling describes is the raid on Steve Jackson Games.
Oh, yeah, Steve Jackson Games. That's the one that always stands out to me. What did a game company have to do with hacking?
It does seem completely unrelated.
Yeah.
But the Secret Service, in their zeal to find evidence related to that E911 document, raided the company's offices and seized their computers.
Why?
Because Steve Jackson Games was developing a cyberpunk role-playing game called GURPS Cyberpunk.
So they raided a game company because they were writing a game about cyberpunk.
Apparently, the agents mistook the game's fictional scenarios for real-world hacking plans.
So they couldn't tell the difference between, like, fantasy and reality.
Right. It really highlights how those lines were blurring in the digital age.
Yeah.
And how that could lead to some serious misunderstandings.
And serious consequences.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly frustrating for the people caught in the crosshairs of this crackdown.
Yeah, especially those who were completely innocent.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just individuals who were impacted. Entire communities were disrupted.
Yeah.
Bulletin boards were shut down. And the flow of information within the hacker underground was severely restricted.
It was a major blow to this emerging culture.
Right, so you have these very real consequences.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about, like, technical challenges and misunderstandings. There was also this really fundamental clash of perspectives at play.
Okay, so you've got different groups seeing this whole situation in completely different ways.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that makes Sterling's book so compelling. He presents these contrasting viewpoints, those of law enforcement, corporate security, and this emerging electronic civil liberties movement. And forces you to consider each side of the story.
So you have, like, the police who see hackers as criminals?
Yeah, plain and simple, their job is to protect infrastructure.
Right, and enforce the law. Pretty straightforward perspective.
Then you have corporate security, often driven by this desire to protect proprietary information, but also at times by this exaggerated fear of the hacker threat.
They see hackers as, like, a direct attack on their business interests.
Exactly. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have these electronic civil libertarians who are just starting to find their voice. And they saw things very differently.
Okay, so they're kind of pushing back against this crackdown.
Yeah, groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF.
The EFF.
And Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility, CPSR.
Okay.
They emerged to defend the rights of hackers.
Interesting. So they're saying that the government's actions were over the line.
They argued that they were often excessive.
Okay.
And infringed upon basic freedoms.
So the EFF enters the scene ready to challenge the government. Who are the people behind this movement?
Well, two key figures were John Perry Barlow and Mitch Kapor. Barlow was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead.
Wow. Okay, so from songwriting to digital activism.
That's right. And Kapor was the founder of Lotus Software.
So you have this musician and this tech entrepreneur coming together.
They saw the hacker crackdown as this threat to free speech privacy and the very nature of this emerging online world.
It's fascinating how these people from such different backgrounds could unite.
It shows how technology can really bring people together.
Yeah.
Especially when they believe something fundamental is at stake.
Right. They felt like the digital realm should be a space for freedom and exploration, not control.
Exactly. So they saw this crackdown as a threat to the future of the internet as they envisioned it.
So what were their main arguments against the government's actions?
Well, the EFF challenged the government on several fronts. They argued that seizing computers and data without proper warrants violated the Fourth Amendment. They also claimed that the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was being used to prosecute hackers, was being applied too broadly, ensnaring people who weren't true criminals.
So they were basically saying the government was using a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Yeah, overreacting to a threat they didn't fully understand.
Right. It's like this classic case of the establishment trying to control a new and unpredictable force.
And the EFF wasn't afraid to use publicity and media savvy to fight back. They understood the power of public opinion, and they really effectively framed the debate in terms of civil liberties and the future of the internet.
It's interesting how they used the media to their advantage.
They knew that public support was crucial to their success.
Right.
They were like the digital age's ACLU.
Wow.
Fighting for the rights of these new digital citizens.
So they play a vital role in shaping the debate.
Along with CPSR. Yeah, but they help shift the conversation and raise awareness about the importance of balancing security concerns with fundamental freedoms.
But it wasn't a clear-cut victory.
No.
Right? There was still a lot of unresolved issues.
Right, a lot of gray areas.
Yeah, where the lines were blurry and the answers weren't easy.
Exactly. And Sterling doesn't offer any easy answers.
Okay.
He leaves us with a lot to think about. Like, what is the value of stolen information?
Okay.
How do we define computer crime in this rapidly evolving digital landscape?
Right.
And how do we balance security concerns with individual liberties?
These are all questions that we're still dealing with today.
Even more so than in the 1990s.
You know, it's interesting. Sterling talks about the impact of technology on individuals.
Yeah.
And there's this one moment towards the end of the book that really stuck with me.
What are you thinking of?
Stanley.
Oh, yeah, Stanley.
The guy with the shopping cart.
Right.
He was so fixated on tracking down this hacker he believed had wronged him. It felt almost tragic, you know?
It was like this disconnect between the digital world and his own reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, he represents kind of the flip side of that whole hacker ethos.
Right.
He's caught in a system he doesn't understand, feeling powerless and alone.
It makes you wonder how many Stanleys are out there.
Yeah.
Just struggling to keep up with this increasingly complex, digital world.
That's a question I think we all need to consider. As technology just keeps advancing at this incredible pace, how do we ensure that everyone benefits?
Right. How do we make sure that people aren't left behind?
Exactly. How do we bridge that digital divide?
Yeah.
And prevent further marginalization?
How do we make sure that all these advancements are actually improving people's lives?
Yeah.
Rather than, leaving them behind.
Right.
And I think those questions resonate even more strongly today than they did back in 1990.
Yeah.
I mean, we're more reliant on technology than ever before.
Yeah, think about it. Our financial systems,
Yeah.
our healthcare, our communication networks, our identities.
Yeah, it's all digital.
It's all increasingly digital. And with that comes this heightened sense of vulnerability.
Right. There's this constant awareness of, the potential for disruption.
For exploitation, for things to go wrong.
Yeah. It's almost like we're living in that cyberpunk world that Steve Jackson Games was envisioning back in the 90s.
Right. Those lines between the physical and digital worlds are becoming so blurred.
And the consequences of cyber attack?
I mean, they can be devastating.
Yeah, we've seen it.
Disrupting critical infrastructure, influencing elections, even threatening national security.
It's a reminder that the digital world has this very real impact on our lives.
Yeah.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right?
No, not at all.
There's also a sense of empowerment that comes with technology.
Sure.
I mean, we've seen how online activism can bring about real change.
Yeah.
People can connect and organize in ways that were never possible before.
Right. It's like that spirit of the hacker, that drive to push boundaries and challenge conventions.
Yeah.
It's become more widespread.
It's not just confined to this small group of, tech-savvy individuals anymore.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
Sterling's book ultimately serves as this reminder that technology is a double-edged sword. It can empower and liberate, but it also creates new vulnerability and can amplify existing inequalities.
So what's the takeaway for you? I mean, after diving deep into Hacker Crackdown, what's the message that really sticks with you?
I think it's a call to action.
Okay.
Sterling's work challenges us to be more critical and more engaged with the technologies that shape our lives, to really understand the history, the motivations, the competing narratives, and the potential consequences of our choices in this digital age.
We can't just be passive consumers of technology.
Right. We need to be active participants shaping the digital world we want to live in.
And that's a conversation that needs to involve everyone.
Absolutely. Not just the tech experts and policymakers, but all of us.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Hacker Crackdown. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the history of hacking.
Yeah, the 1990 crackdown and that ongoing struggle to balance security and freedom in this increasingly digital world.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, stay curious and stay engaged.